Collective Families. I'm Erica Desper, founder of the Confident Parenting Collective, and I am here to bring you all sorts of fantastic information so that you can better support your kiddos. And today I'm happy to be joined by Justin Menda. He and his wife, thank you, Justin, hi, own a tutoring company called Rocket Prep. And we're going to talk today. We're going to have a casual conversation. Thank you, Justin, for joining me.
Oh, thank you, Erica.
I'm excited for this. So some of our audience knows my personal experience with my kiddo. I won't go into it in detail now, but I'm a mom. I should also mention Justin and his wife are parents as well. So we've all been in the trenches.
Yep.
My son is 13. We're still on a journey of discovering his learning differences, how he learns, how we can best support him. But I noticed really early on in his school career, he was highly intelligent. He tried really, really hard. He cared about his performance, but his performance was not matching the potential that I knew he had. And that was one of my first clues that we needed some kind of help to figure out what was going on. There was something under the surface. So what we want to talk about today is what you, as a tutor and a parent, would want other parents to know when they notice that their child's performance does not match their potential. So thank you for what you're going to share with us. And let's get to it.
My pleasure. Yeah.
So go for it.
Okay. So, this is, it's such a hot topic, and it's so important to me for so many ways. I mean, not least of which because, I was that kid for a fair part of my childhood. Everybody was always telling me, man, you're really going places, and, you're so smart and everything. And I could sort of see what they were talking about. And there was always like some disconnect, like underneath the, I'm getting all this praise, whatever. But like, there was always some, like, it always felt off to me somehow, like they were all missing something. And, for the longest time, I would chalk that up to, I just have terrible self-esteem, which I did.
Right, of course.
But, and that's actually a super common thing for very intelligent people, and that's for for reasons we could probably get into. In addition to that, though, and I think in some ways this might actually be a more important thing to remember. Success in any sphere, like however you want to define success, whether that's the typical definition of having like a really solid career that makes you a lot of money, or broadening it to other things that are at least as important to our lives, like having good relationships and having a family and so on. Whatever success means to you is about so much more than your talent in one or two areas. And we, and again, when I say we, I'm including myself in this. Like, this is a human thing. Like, one thing the human mind does is we tend to assume that when somebody's really talented in a couple of ways, they should be successful. And there's so much more to it, usually. It requires success. And again, no matter how you define it, requires a suite of abilities. Mm-hmm. And it's important to understand that being really good at one thing doesn't necessarily mean that a person should be good at something else. In fact, maybe very often it means the opposite. So if we just pick intelligence as an example, that's a perfect example. And this is something that I have dealt with myself, and I deal with it. I help my students deal with it quite a bit. When you're smart in the sense of, and I want to be careful how I say this, because there are lots of different kinds of intelligence, right? So when I say things like smart and intelligent, I'm referring to something very specific, which is general intelligence, like sort of just like, I often call it raw mental horsepower, like the ability to solve complex problems, like the kinds of intelligence that is generalizable across lots of different contexts.
Right.
That it tends to be, it's largely innate, and it's pretty stable. And although its expression can depend on lots of different environmental factors and so on, but one effect it tends to have is that very early on, it just removes the need to work at anything or to have focus or discipline in anything, because all you have to do to succeed is show up, you know. And very often, you know, we I mean, it's so easy for us as parents to just get lost in that. Wow, you know, my kid's so smart, my kid's so smart, my kid's so smart, this is amazing. And then wake up a few years later and be like, wait a minute, why don't they want to try at anything?
Right.
You know, so and it's, I would say it, in cases where we perceive a lot of potential and we feel like the student is underperforming that potential, that's it. One of the most important things to remember, because, you know, we always have to start with understanding. Right? Always have to start with understanding, because if we don't understand, if we're not sufficiently interested in what they're going through, and if we're not sufficiently able to put our own baggage, you know, check our own baggage at the door,
which we all have.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we wouldn't be human otherwise, right? If we're not sufficiently able to do all those things, they know it, and they're going to shut down, right? So the most important thing, the first thing we need to do is understand. And I think the most important thing to understand, or at least the first thing to try to understand, is that the reason they don't try, the reason they haven't developed, you know, grit, or, you know, persistence or work ethic or whatever it is that they haven't needed to.
They haven't needed to.
I mean, they're living the 80-20 rule. Right. If they can just show up and get a B or even a C, and we say we want them to get an A because we think that's their potential, okay, that's fine. But the fact of the matter is they have to work like 5 times as hard to get a grade that's, what, 25% better? Right. Which, on, like, and we have to be real about this. That's a stupid calculus. like when you look at it,
really smart, they're going to figure that out pretty quickly, right?
Immediately.
Right. So
absolutely.
So to the parent who says, well, maybe it's because my child just doesn't care about the grade or whatever, is this your answer to that? Of like, what would your answer be to that?
Yeah.
To tie that into what you're saying now.
Yeah. Okay. So there are lots of possible reasons. They tend to coincide. Different combinations are in play for different students, and a lot of them tend to be related. So yeah, one reason is, I don't care is just code for, this is intimidating. I don't feel like I have the necessary skills to do it. I'd rather just not try.
Mechanism.
Right. Absolutely. And again, as much of a waste as that is, if we want to help them through that, we have to start with the understanding that that is reasonable from their perspective. And it's a rare person indeed who will actually push past that on their own. So that's one thing. Another thing is, if they don't care, maybe they shouldn't.
Tell me more about
honestly.
that.
Yeah.
Because I know parents are gonna like, oh, grades.
Right.
College life.
Okay. So and if that's your reaction, as it is with most people, you know, for me included, the next question to ask yourself is why? Why are they so important? Yes, it's true that people who get better grades in school tend to do better on average. And there are plenty of success stories to underpin the adage that, you know what they say, success has 2 C's and no A's. Right? You know, like it's not the only path. You can
probably list a handful of people. All the tech guys, they all were like, school, forget it.
Right. Exactly.
That's brilliant. You know, hugely successful.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you know, and again, you know, that's the exception and not the rule, right? To be fair, right? So there are reasons we want our kids to get better grades, but we have to understand those reasons first.
Right.
And if we're just going along with the ambient assumption, as we tend to do, you know, which again is not an unreasonable strategy, right? Like if everyone else is doing something, yeah, you should probably do it. I mean, with notable exceptions, right? But so and you know, again, I'm not saying that that's that anything's necessary. When I say something's reasonable, I don't mean to say that it's right. I just mean to say, it's understandable when people think that way.
Right.
But
We got to make the connection before we can get anything
exactly.
with them, for
Right.
sure.
And
Especially these kids, but any kids.
absolutely. Yeah. And double as much for students we feel are underperforming their potential, because another dynamic they face is that they are chronically understimulated. And it's not hard after years of, all I have to do to succeed is show up, to start to conclude that maybe these adults don't take me seriously.
Sure.
And as I understand, there are some gender differences there. Boys are more likely to go down that path than girls, as I understand.
Interesting.
Yeah. So like, and so I'm sure we've all seen, the two main kinds of attitude you can have when you encounter something that's way easier than you could handle. One kind of attitude is, what, really? This is all I have to do? Just like add 10 numbers or whatever? Fine, I'm going to do that and go on with my life, right? I'll thank you for the A, now I'm going to go do something I'd rather do. But the other attitude is, really? Like, you want me to add 2 + 2? Well, okay. I mean, you obviously don't take me seriously, so I'm not going to do anything for you. Like, I'm not your monkey.
Interesting.
And and again, I'm not saying that's the right attitude to have. I mean, it's terrible. It leads downhill very quickly. But that doesn't mean it's unreasonable from the perspective of somebody who's in it.
Right.
And we have to understand that. We have to understand that first.
Okay. So that's for kids who maybe don't care. That's sort of like where they are in their head. If we switch to the parent side of that, and I know we need to tread cautiously, there are different parenting styles.
Right.
Would you say there's a
should be.
style of parenting that lends itself more to a child developing that mentality? It's going to be my style.
Wow.
You can see the rotor over my head.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think I'd be very curious to hear how you're dealing with this, because as you said, there are lots of different parenting styles, as there should be.
Sure.
In fact, that may be the reason kids don't come with a manual, right? Because there are so many. I mean, they're not blank slates. They come into this world loaded with predispositions, and nobody knows what they are until they pan out.
Right.
So as I'm the perspective I try to adopt, and I want to be careful to say I try, because I do not want to hold myself up as an exemplar here. But the perspective I like, and the one that I try to put into practice in my own life, is that parenting, and actually any role of any kind of authority in a child's life, should be about a continual process of getting to know this person who's developing, and constantly reassessing your own efforts to be the best possible steward or guide, or however it is you want to frame it, for that person in that part of their life. So yeah, I mean, there's bound to be a lot of variation here. I think one thing that's critically important, and that we are like going really fast and really hard in the wrong direction on, is that we do not give kids enough time and space to learn to problem solve on their own.
And you were just about to say the F word. What's that word?
Oh,
fail.
Okay, yeah.
I heard it coming, and he changed it to problem solving. But I think as a parent who historically, not that effort, as a parent who is categorically a helicopter parent, really out of like, if I don't do that, nothing will ever happen, and we don't know what we're dealing with, and you don't see motive, like all for what felt like very good reasons. And I am in a really hard process right now of like, okay, I can't do that forever, and it's not doing you any favors, and now you're 13. So I'm trying really tough. But yeah, when we sort of helicopter, or whatever word you want to think of, I think we tend to over structure their time, which I know you want to talk about.
Yes,
and we rescue and we problem solve, and no matter what the intentions are, what you're saying is that does rob them of opportunities to problem solve for themselves, even if the first or the fifth solution they come up with is a fail. That's what can eventually it's more intellectually stimulating, which you were just saying they're
Right.
missing.
Yep. Exactly.
And B, they're just worlds ahead for the next time they encounter a similar problem. So let me know if I'm laying that out right, because you're the
No, no,
expert here.
no, I love the way you put that. That's absolutely true. And I think, as much as it's important for anybody to see themselves as having some capacity to problem solve, it may be, okay, I want to be very careful how I say this, because I was about to say it's more important. I would say it's probably more urgent,
Mhm,
more present for students we feel like, for children we feel like are underperforming their potential.
mhm.
Um, it's always, it's important to remember the trajectory is more important than where you're at,
Mhm.
at all times. And that's
Yeah,
that's one thing. And yeah.
it takes a lot of pausing. It takes a lot of breathing.
Oh,
Just like
totally.
it's really hard not to rescue, especially when you see your kids struggling. And I know that I know another reason you would say that kids struggle. Let's say we've talked about kids who maybe don't care
Mhm.
and aren't motivated for various valid reasons. Let's talk about
Mhm.
kids who are motivated and do care. Performance
Mhm.
is still not matching potential, which I think applies more to my guy.
Mhm.
It can be because they lack a crucial skill. And I know
Absolutely.
that one of the crucial my son lacks lacks many. One of his crucial skills that he has always lacked, even as like a toddler building a block tower, was frustration tolerance. So,
Aha.
what do you think the connection is, or what would you say to a parent? Like, if you know your child is lacking the ability to
Mhm.
sit with frustration, push through difficulty, how does that all tie into why these things may not be matching?
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And I mean, that's one of the it's one of the most important problems of parenting, like, beyond taking care of basic needs, right? It's one of the most important problems. It's one of the most interesting problems. It's one of the hardest problems to solve. So yeah, I love that. How do you encourage frustration tolerance? And yeah, I love that. Um, I mean, I can offer a few things to consider. Um, Probably, well, okay. So um, people listening may have seen this as a trend. I think a trend in what I'm saying, rather. Um, One of the things I've gotten a ton of mileage out of in my personal and professional lives is when something, when I think someone else is doing something wrong, I try to find that in myself,
Hmm.
and I try to solve it there. And without fanfare, without drawing attention to myself, which is, not always easy, because when we want to help somebody, we tend to be performative sometimes.
Mhm.
Um, I try to sort of allow the other person to see me, do that development in myself.
Mm. Yeah,
So,
modeling.
exactly. So, and you have much more opportunity to do that as a parent um, than I might as a professional, but I
Mhm.
still try to do it as a professional as well. So, it's things like, um, when they're like, "Oh man, I don't know how to do this," be like, "Wow, okay, huh? Well, that's interesting, isn't it?
Mhm.
Where do you want to go now? How are you feeling?
My new
Are you ready
mission
to give
is
this a
to
shot?"
speak to my son solely in questions right now. Everything you just said, that's like all I'm doing right now. It's
Yeah,
so hard and it's like agonizingly time consuming.
it
But
is.
the results, the shift that has happened, just even in his willingness to talk through things with me or to consider oh, I have a thought on that, do you want to hear it? Instead of like, well, why don't
See?
you just it's tough. I'm not gonna lie to the parents watching
Yeah.
this, but it makes a huge shift in his thought process and his mood and our dynamic.
See? It's that
Yeah.
simple. I love what you're saying, because like it just exemplifies. I think I heard this from the book, how to talk so kids will listen, and listen so kids will talk.
Great book.
I think that's where I heard this. It's never too early and it's never too late. I mean, it's tempting to think that, if somebody makes it to their teenage years, lacking, particular skills, that, oh, geez, we've the cat's out of the bag there. But that is one of the most neuroplastic times in their life,
Yeah.
really. Probably the second. I think it's the second most, is it?
That's what I
After
keep
birth,
telling
something like that?
myself because I feel all
Yeah.
sorts of guilt and, whatever that we got this far. And I'm just trying a lot of this now and we're just getting our resources together
Yeah.
now and our diagnoses. But yeah, this is an opportunity and it's the one we have. So it's the one we're
Absolutely.
gonna go
No,
with.
no, it's gold. And it um I don't know. Looking back on my time as the kid who was arguably underperforming his potential, I think um not having developed those skills early on actually gives me a perspective that I can use to relate to people in ways that I just would not be able to before. And one of the things I've
Sure.
seen throughout my career is that um you know you know especially in test prep, for example, we always want to hire the person who like got a 1600 on their SAT without even trying, right? But for that person, everything's intuitive,
Right.
and
So they wouldn't
intuition's by
understand the
definition,
struggle.
right? Exactly. Yeah.
Right, right.
They don't
Yeah, you're
understand.
definitely able to come
So
from a place of having been there, which I'm sure is super helpful for
yeah.
kids and they appreciate. While we're talking about lacking crucial skill, to go back to something you said at the outset, success is contingent on a suite of abilities.
Yes.
So if we were going to define that suite, I think you would say we're talking mainly about executive functioning skills, which
Mm,
is commonly what kids are lacking. Most parents that are watching this probably know what those are. Um, but how would you say that ties in to this performance not matching
yeah.
potential? How would you describe executive functioning skills or deficits and why does it matter?
Okay. So with the with the caveat that uh, uh, an expert in this topic, in this particular topic, or like a psychologist or somebody's might be pulling their hair out to hear me say this. The way I tend to think about it, for myself and for my own purposes, that executive functioning is about. I mean, it's basically everything related to somebody's ability to choose a goal, first of all,
Yep.
which is actually surprisingly complicated,
Yeah.
and then orient themselves toward it, and then take steps in that direction and be able to correct themselves along the way. That's
And then
sort
get
of,
to, and then get to the goal.
and then eventually, yeah, hopefully,
Right.
right?
I like to think of it as like the secretary that plans out your whole day and makes sure
Cool.
you shows up for your appointments and you answer your emails and you know what time
Right.
it is and all of that. And kids that it would be understandable that if a child is lacking in one or all or several of those executive functions, which we won't take the time to lay out here, they could also then have trouble persisting in the face of difficulty because they're going to meet
Yep.
so many difficulties, right?
Yep.
And then could easily feel overwhelmed, which is probably the final reason. I think you wanted to talk about why kids aren't matching their potential. It's
Yep.
just total. So we have the kids where it's too easy, and so they
Mhm.
don't feel taken seriously. We have the kids who can't persist, can't problem solve, and now we have the kids who feel overwhelmed. Did
Mhm.
you want to touch on that overwhelm a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, there are. I think there are a lot of potential reasons for it, which is sort of what makes it a devilish problem because uh, kids can get to what looks like the same place through a lot of different routes. Um, but yeah, I mean, if somebody feels overwhelmed, um, the way I think about that is that it's fundamentally um, they don't think what's in front of them is like okay, they think it's too difficult, it's unpleasant, and it's not sufficiently likely to get them something they want. And it may be that their bar on each of those points is too low,
Mm-hmm.
but the point is, whatever their criteria are, they've done the analysis, and again, it's probably, um, again, I'm going to use the word reasonable. That doesn't mean to say that people are right to be overwhelmed, because obviously not, I think, but it's also not unreasonable to feel overwhelmed, given that you perceive the situation that way. Now, Why do they feel that way? I mean, usually it's because it's because of some combination, as far as I can tell anyway, it's because of some combination of, they lack critical skills, um, and they don't feel like the people around them are they don't feel like the people around them are on their side,
Mhm.
and they aren't present enough in whatever the situation is.
Mhm.
And different people have, again, different people have different bars for, for each of those criteria. I mean, some people um, can go along with whatever the crowd's doing. That's fine. Like they don't need to be, front and center. Some people really do need to be front and center the whole time. Um, Need is a strong word, but I think people sort of know what I mean. Um, so, you know, my job as a parent or as an educator is to figure out, what combination of those uh, factors is in play,
Mhm.
and then just sort of work from there. I think, to the extent that they're lacking skills. I mean, we sort of talked about that, but I think by far the most important skill set is what we're talking about when we say executive functioning.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that's only going to get more true with time.
And the great news is
As
that those skills can be explicitly taught
Yes,
and practiced
yes,
and strengthened.
absolutely, yeah,
It's
and
not a deficit you have to have forever.
yeah, exactly, and that's sort of gets to one of the reasons I love your focus on, you know responding with questions to sort of help kids figure stuff out for themselves rather than um, interject your own assessment of the situation, which again, to be fair, is more likely to be right than theirs is. Right.
Right.
But but that's not the point.
But
I
that's
mean,
how we
this
got
is
there, probably.
right.
Got it. So we've got
Yeah.
this smart kid paradox. They're smart,
Mhm.
they're not matching their potential. Now we know some reasons why that would happen, or it
Mhm.
could be a combination of reasons. And we have two different scenarios. Maybe kids who don't care, kids who care but just can't get there. In
Mhm.
both of those scenarios, as the kid who was there and ended up performing to potential, and as a parent, and now an educator, in both those scenarios, what is the main thing you think that children need to be able to learn, to be able to creatively think? Like, what does this all hinge on?
Mhm. Do I have to pick one thing?
No. You
Okay.
can give us several.
Yeah. No. I mean, I think picking
Well,
one
and I
thing
think I
is
stepped on your
potentially
answer
interesting
too. I
because
really wanted to ask you, what do children need? And I think you were going to say they need to learn, think creatively and problem solve, but how do we get in the way of that? What do we need to not be doing?
oh wow. Okay. Don't get me started. How much time do we have? Um, no, this is something that like I mean my wife, she's bless her, she has to hold me back so much when I start talking about this. No, I mean, okay, so we're talking a lot about grit and persistence and curiosity and problem solving and willingness to fail and everything. Do you know anybody who's as good at all that stuff as a 2-year-old?
Right.
Like they're born with that,
Yep.
and we beat it out of them.
And I bet you're going to say we beat it out of them by overstructuring as they get older, like the lack of
Right.
play. There's
And it's
just
not,
not a lot
it's
of value on play as you get older,
exactly right.
or whatever
Like
play
we
looks
we
like for your age group.
yeah, and there's so yeah, great. Yeah. I love that framing. Yeah. I mean, it's not one thing. Like it's not like us as parents or schools or the greater environment, whatever. It's as always, it's the confluence of all those factors. And more than that, it's how those factors play with the kid's predisposition.
Mhm.
So you could have like a given situation that allows one child to like flourish and totally self-actualize and everything, but like the same situation
Yeah.
exactly might be, um, might not be so successful with another kid, right? So it's complex, and I don't want to make it look like any one thing is the reason, whereas everything else is secondary, right? But we have to recognize our own role in this. I think there are I would say there are three main factors. One of them is that school is overstructured, like hideously overstructured. From the moment they show up to the moment they leave, we're telling them where to be and when, what to do and how. all the goals are imposed on them. We don't, we make them memorize like facts and procedures and stuff like that they don't understand. It's all like, and that used to start like deep into grade school at least. Now it starts in preschool, and there are a lot of reasons for that. Some of them reasonable, but it's destructive in the long run. And that's where, a lot of my job ends up being picking up the pieces from that, because kids are just convinced by the end of it that math, for example, consists of applying an algorithm someone else developed to get a predetermined answer to a question that nobody cared to ask.
Right.
So that's
and
cool.
It's probably a whole nother conversation why we've gone in that direction.
Yes.
And what can be done
absolutely.
about it, but it is what it is.
Yeah.
I remember, not to interrupt you, you're going to lose your train of thought, but my son was in a very outdoorsy, play-based preschool program, which I chose for all of these reasons. Pros and cons. It was awesome, but it didn't prepare him for kindergarten in public school. When we went to the orientation, one of the first things the person said on the stage is, "You won't find any play kitchens here." And I just and then when we toured, I'm sure my son wasn't paying attention, but then when we toured the classroom, he leaned over and he said, "Mom, where are all the toys?" And I was like, oh, we're in for it. And I don't know if that was a good decision to do that play-based program, because the contrast ended up being just so hard. And this is kindergarten.
It can be jarring.
Was like his very first. So that just sort of underscores that really, really heavily.
Sure. Right.
And when you're playing, that's when you figure out how to solve problems.
Right.
Your tower falls over and you got to rebuild it a different way. And it's where you learn that frustration tolerance. So that's really, really difficult. So if school's overstructured, and then we as parents are maybe doing a ton of hand-holding, rescuing, reminding,
and then
not letting them fail, they get that double whammy of that makes a lot of sense.
And then there's tech. I don't want to let this go before we mention this, because this is a really hot topic. The big tech platforms right now, the ones that most people are concerned about, social media, the big social media platforms, plus like video streaming platforms like YouTube and so on, and even to some extent Reddit and Quora and stuff like that. What are they about? This is essentially an army of engineers armed with supercomputers, the entire purpose of which is to figure out how to exploit human psychology to capture as much of our attention as possible and then sell it to advertisers. Okay, so what results from this?
It's so gross when you say it like that. And that's that feeling I get when I see, my son on it, and the effect it has, and the time suck. That's that you just labeled, like, I'm like, oh, I hate this.
It's on purpose.
Yeah.
It's on. There's a great book about this. Actually, okay, I don't agree with everything that's in the book, but overall, it's an awesome book. It's called Stolen Focus by Johan Hari. If I can plug that. I have no affiliation. I just, read it recently. It's amazing. But yeah, and like, it's important to remember the people at those companies, they're not trying to destroy the world. They're not trying to wreck a generation and everything. They're trying to, because they know that if they don't make the money off of this, somebody else will.
Sure.
And they're just going to get left in the dust. And they rationalize what they're doing with all kinds of thin rationales, but ultimately they know they're doing it, and they won't stop. So what's the effect? The effect is they have figured out how to exploit human psychology to capture as much attention as possible, because of course they have, right? And it's a lot of very smart people with incredibly advanced technology that is constantly adapting and constantly learning based on what everybody is doing on the platform at all times to build better and better models of human behavior so that you can capture more and more of the attention. So if kids don't have enough time and space to find themselves at home and self-actualize at home, they don't get it at school, and then when they're out of school, they're on their devices where it's essentially robbed from them. Like, where's the surprise? Like, I think the results are entirely predictable.
Sure. And you, to use your own words, you would call it the corrosive effects of social media, which I thought that gave me like a visual,
right?
Because we know what corrosion looks like and what it does to the item that's being corroded. Can
It's
you
not like a
touch,
Terminator style apocalypse, right? Like
right,
it's not all of a sudden they drop this bomb on us and society's in ruins. It's not like that at all. But
right.
it's like an eating away, like
It's a
sort of a
slow
fraying
burn.
of the edges.
I
Yeah.
have said many times, I just said it again yesterday to my own mom, and I'll say it again now. I really wish I had the opportunity to raise my son amidst less technology. And obviously I have,
See?
a fair measure of control over how much he's exposed to it, but some of it really, I mean, if you're at the gas station, there's a TV screen. If you're in the checkout line at the grocery store, there's a screen. It's like some
Hmm.
of it is out of our control.
Right.
Um, yeah, it's a little unfortunate. And I know there's benefits to it. Video games, hey, his frustration tolerance has picked up greatly because the one thing he will persist with is a goal within a video game. And then we've been able to translate that, to other things. So it's not
You
all bad all
have.
the time.
Nice. How did you do that?
Yeah, just like reminding him, like, hey, remember when you really wanted to, whatever, jump over that thing where you kept falling in the ditch? Like, how did you do that 175 times without giving up? Like, can we take some of that and, put it here? I mean, it's hard when the same
Oh,
interest and
beautiful.
motivation isn't there, but I don't want parents to feel like it's all, we've got to ditch all of it all the time, but definitely it's
No,
concerning.
can we dwell on that for a second? Because
Yeah.
I think what you said was so important, and it's so wonderful to hear that you had the clarity of vision to be able to pick up on that. And that's what I was going to say. If I had to say or be shot, like what's the one most important thing, like the most important single thing, I would say it is that clarity of vision, because that's what allows you to understand, like for example, when you're asking questions, instead of giving a statement, it seems like the problem is taking a lot longer to solve. But I would argue, it's important in that moment to remember what the real problem is that you're trying to solve. And the real problem you're trying to solve isn't like the little tactical victory or loss, or you're trying to, you're playing the long game. And by taking that approach of making everything a question, and helping them, helping them ask the right questions, you're doing a much better job in the long run. And I think, what you seized on is a very simple thing, like in the video game example, is a very simple thing that most people can do. And it doesn't occur to us to do a lot of the time, because we think, oh, it's so horrible, turn it off.
Right, right, right.
But I learned frustration tolerance when I was like in video games as well, in much the same way. And the way I mean, I had to pull myself out of what feels like a video game addiction. I don't know if it meets the criteria, but
Right.
it felt like a video game addiction. And one of the things that allowed me to sort of like think clearly was, hey, wait a minute, like I can do this in the game. Why can't I do this in the rest of my life? This is stupid. Like, it's the same brain.
Right.
And that was one of the most important steps that I took. So, and that was what allowed me to escape, that, again, what felt like a video game addiction
Yeah.
when I was an adult. And if you're helping your child do that at age 13, they're going to be miles ahead of
Right.
where
That
I
makes me
was.
feel great.
That's awesome.
I will try to do that more often. Yeah, it was a light bulb moment for me of like, hey, it's not all bad. Yeah, good, good. So can you, while we're still on video game or social media, sorry, you said something to me
Mhm.
about the type of stimuli that kids get or humans get from social media. It's a sciencey word, so
Mhm.
I'll let you do it. And let's not get too technical for our audience, but like
Was it?
what is it that's such the draw about social media, and why can that
Yeah.
not compete with anything in real life?
Yeah. Yeah. So okay. I would want to preface this by pointing out that, a lot of people, there are a lot of people who've spoken much more eloquently and in a much more informed a way as I have on this. I would point people toward, um, uh, okay, there's a great article. I hope it's still up, but the title is something like, this is how your fear and outrage are being sold for profit. And
I
so
love
that gets into some of the dynamics. The article, or sorry, the Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma, is a bit of a scare piece, which is, a little bit insulting, but like the content of it is dead on, I would say.
right.
Um, and there's a great book by Dr. Jean Twenge called iGen that sort of gets into some of these dynamics.
Okay.
But anyway, so okay, I think the best way to understand this is sort of the best way to understand the appeal of sugary foods and drugs and video games, we have instincts that tend to encourage us to repeat certain kinds of behaviors, right? So we tend to want to follow certain stimuli. And the reason we have those tendencies is that in the ancestral environment, those are our ancestors who, like, I mean, I guess you could say by necessity, we are the descendants of people who had those tendencies rather than the ones who didn't. So the tendency to just want to devour as much sweet food as you can. I mean, in our ancestral environment, that was a rare treat, and it was a fruit. It was a whole food, right? So when you come across that, yeah, you better devour as much as you possibly can, because you don't know when the next time is that you're going to see it.
Right.
Blander foods, you don't have to have an instinct to consume as much of that as possible, because it's much more frequent, and half the time you're just going to be hungry enough to just eat whatever comes your way, and you don't need to take as much of that in. But if you come across like a really nice fruit, or like a really fatty game animal or something, yeah, you better, because you don't know when the next time is it. But now, not only are those foods no longer rare in a lot of parts of the world, but also we have figured out how to make foods that stimulate only the part of the fruit that tickles that response in our brains.
Mm-hmm.
It turns out it's not the whole fruit,
Right.
because the rule isn't, when you encounter an apple or an orange or a banana or whatever it is, eat as much of those as possible.
Right.
The thing is, when that sugar hits your tongue,
Yep.
that's what triggers your reward seeking
Yep.
circuitry in the brain. So we figured out, again, without particularly wishing it, we just realized, well, we can isolate this sugar
Mm-hmm.
and just make food that just has that, and wow, it's awesome. Holy smokes. And we tend to want to devour as much of it as we possibly can, and then we end up with a bunch of health problems as a result. And it's exactly the same thing, same dynamic with social media. Among those instincts we have, the things we want to seek are things like the approval of other people, putting our opinions out there and having them confirmed by a tribe of people, piling on in outrage when we sense an opposing opinion, or an opinion that goes against that of our tribe.
Mm-hmm.
Social media is a way to tickle just those instincts without the broader context of social relationships that actually helps us.
Right. Wow. Well, you said other people might say it more eloquently, but that was pretty darn eloquent.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
I'm going to have to go back to that and watch that myself. That was really, really, really good. Okay. So to tie this beginning piece up with these kids that maybe don't care, maybe do care, maybe are lacking skills, maybe haven't had the opportunity to critically think, problem solve, etc. You said something that I really wanted to emphasize. Children in general, but especially these children we're talking about, need people who believe in them relentlessly.
Yes.
And I that stopped me in my preparation for this. And I was like, what does that mean to you? How would you expand on that? And I'm assuming that was that came from your own personal experience, and probably your professional one as well.
Yep.
I turn that over to you. What does that mean, that kids need people who believe in them relentlessly?
Yeah. Just, speaking about my own experience, I would say that my wife married me for the person she knew, partly anyway, because, for the person she knew I could become. And that can be a very dangerous proposition.
Sure.
And I realized, it took me, I would say, embarrassingly long to understand that that's what she had done. And when I finally realized it, I don't know if I will ever be able to express my gratitude. for her, to her, in that, for taking that leap of faith.
Mhm.
The fact that she saw something in me, she saw not something, many things in me that I did not see in myself.
Mm.
And in many ways couldn't, and that she was always there and she never quit.
Mm.
You know, at some point, okay, so that's one ingredient. And the
Mhm.
other crucial ingredient, um, is that the person you believe in has to want to get better.
Sure.
They don't even need to know how.
Right.
They just need to have a sincere motivation to do it. And you know, one of the reasons believing in somebody like that is so risky is that we often can't tell
Mhm.
whether that desire is sincere. So we just have to look at their behavior. And I think what she saw in me, you know, was a desperately faltering but ultimately upward trajectory. And you know, she's one of the main reasons I can say that I'm here today.
Oh, I hope she
Um,
watches this.
yeah, yeah, me too.
Yeah,
Because you
so
know,
in your
again,
case,
I
it was more of
so
a partner, a life
yeah,
partner. Obviously, for parents, maybe it's less risky for parents because
yes,
we're kind of tied to our kids regardless. And
right,
I would hope that we would always be there, but it is sometimes hard to show up. I'm sure parents get discouraged,
yeah.
especially if they have the kind of kid who does not seem to care. Um, how do you think parents can show up relentlessly? And let me add the caveat of sometimes we're not what our kids who our kids want and who our kids need,
Right.
or they
Right.
hear it better from somebody else. So how does that look different when it's a
Yeah.
parent?
Yeah. I mean, I think I think the main difference is what you suggested, is which is that the risk tends to be lower. I think a lot of the same dynamics apply. I mean, when I was going to say, you know, when I in many ways after my wife and I got married, I was in sort of like a fog. Um, and when I came out of that, that's when I was able to look back on my life and realize, hey, you know, she wasn't the first. You know,
Mm,
my parents were there,
mhm.
um, through you know, dynamics that were at least as tough as what I put my poor wife through.
Right.
Um, but it was like I think I think a lot of it is, you know, look, I'm here, I'm committed. I don't know where this is going to go, and I don't care.
Mhm.
I am going to be attentive. I'm going to listen, and I'm going to constantly try to adapt myself to the new realities. But the goal is always going to be to be on this journey with you,
Mhm. Mhm.
wherever it leads.
Right.
And that doesn't mean I'm going to subordinate, you know, right and wrong
Right.
to doing what you think should be done. Like, I'm not going to, you know, I'm not necessarily going to gratify all of your impulses, but the reason I'm not going to do that
Right.
is that I know that that's going to put you in a place that you don't want to be. So, um, I'm here and I'm safe, and we can talk anytime you want. And if you're not ready, that's cool. I'm going to step back. I'm going to watch on the sidelines. I'm here with the first aid kit. You know, I'm ready when you are.
Okay. Awesome.
Does that help?
It helps a lot. And I think that's a good segue into, let's talk about, like, let's start with the negative. What are some
Mhm.
mistakes parents maybe are making, or I guess we don't have to call them mistakes, the things that don't serve the scenario well, don't move our kids ahead. Like what do we do and say that doesn't help? And then we'll shift to, like, what does it look like in practice to do it differently or better? Like what are you saying to the kids that you're tutoring whose confidence is growing and all that? So what are
Mhm.
some of those mistakes first?
With respect to showing up for your kids?
Yeah, just like not necessarily in how we show up, but I guess how we dialogue with our kids, those things that
Oh,
maybe we don't want to say or do, and then we'll
yeah,
switch it
yeah,
to things we do want to say or do. Because this
yeah.
has been a ton of great information. Parents might be like, okay, I hear you,
What do I
and
do
I'm going
about
to
it?
do this. And as soon as they hit the next challenge with their kid, they're like, I don't know how to apply it to this situation, right? So let's get
Yeah,
some actionable, like, what do we not say? What do we not do?
yeah, yeah. Okay. So, I mean, some of this is gonna, a lot of this is gonna hark back to stuff that I mentioned previously. So I think the most important thing is to have clarity of vision.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, who are you as a parent? What are, um, what are the right long-term goals to have?
Mm-hmm.
And to be constantly chewing on that, or at the very least to set aside space every day to like to really think about that and walk through some potential circumstances in your mind and sort of imagine like, how would I like to respond in this kind of a
Mm-hmm.
situation? How do I wish I responded in this previous one? And just gaming it out. um, I, I would say another thing is, at the same time, um, you want to avoid the notion, and again, the human notion. This isn't a, like a bad parents thing. This is a thing
Right.
that people like. This is how the human mind functions.
Right.
Um, you want to avoid the idea that we have that, that I have the answers, right? Like, because
Which ties
um,
into I told you so, right? I
oh
told you that
yeah,
wasn't going to work. We should have
yeah,
done it this way, which is can come
yeah,
out very easily, and we're right.
right, mhm,
That's not going to hit the way we want it to hit, is
right.
it?
No, 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 absolutely. So, okay, one thing, one book I can recommend on this is called The Righteous Mind by Dr.
Okay.
Jonathan Haidt, Haidt. Um, and I mean, there's a lot in the book. I,
You might have to
it's
make us a book list.
Oh yeah, yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, it'd be a pleasure. Yeah, I mean, The Righteous Mind is the most consequential piece of text I've ever come across. I can
Wow.
say that without reservation because it like it fundamentally changed how I think about how human minds work. The primary function of the human mind isn't to find the truth and think logically.
Mhm.
The primary function of our reasoning abilities, in particular, is to make sense of what we're thinking and feeling, and to
Mhm.
rationalize it, to justify it, to advocate for it.
Mhm.
And there are a lot of reasons for that. There are a lot of experiments that that lead us to that conclusion. Um, but when we say "I told you so," what our kids aren't hearing, what our kids are hearing is not, "Oh, I didn't listen to them before, and they're now reminding me that I should have listened to them." Okay, got it. That's not what they're hearing. What they're hearing is they feel like they've won at my expense.
Mm.
you know and they may not even know that that's what they're feeling, but that's what they're reacting to, and
Right.
bitter
Which
pill to
puts us on
swallow.
opposite
But
sides of the challenge.
yes,
I'm on the winning side.
exactly,
You're on the losing side. We're not on the same team.
right, exactly, yeah, yeah.
Right, right,
and
right,
and
right.
and and to be honest, I mean, we have to be honest with ourselves very often, as parents. In those moments, we need to make ourselves feel better for not having done enough to help them
Right.
avoid that harm. And although our conscious mind is thinking, okay, I need to remind them to listen to me next time, that might actually be motivated by, I need to make myself feel better. I need to reassure myself that
Sure.
I did tell them before. And that subconscious motivation is probably what the kid's going to be responding to,
Well, and it
not the
also
actual
positions
propositional
us in a
content.
place of, I know better than you do,
Mhm.
which again, we have life experience. It's very
We
possible
do.
we do know
Yeah.
better than they do. But how is that going to serve their curiosity, their problem solving, their
Right.
critical thinking? We're just
Right.
kind of shutting it down. Um,
Like
yeah,
the point of parenting isn't that your kid shouldn't have done that one thing. The point of parenting is to do what you can to send somebody out in the world who can figure out what to do and what not to do.
yeah.
Prepare
Wait,
the
wait, we're
child for
back
the
to
road,
like,
not the road for the
you know,
child.
give a man a fish or teach him how to fish or any of
Right.
those like
Right.
things. So it
Yeah.
seems to me like there's a domino effect. I know one of the things we do as parents is make a lot of statements, right? So we've been
Hmm.
talking about shifting the ratio of statements to questions. So I would challenge parents who are watching, like every time you make a statement throughout your day, mark it down. And every time you make a question, just like notice, is everything full of statements? Can I add
Right.
in
Yeah.
more
Love
questions?
that.
Try to make that little shift. I actually have a book recommendation. It's a newer one. It's called What Do You Say?
Mm.
Ned Johnson and Bill, I can't think of his last name. Um, that's what's
Sticks
allowing
root.
me to, I cannot remember, so I don't know actually who he is.
Mm.
Um, but he is a psychologist or psychiatrist. It literally gives you the scenarios you might encounter and the actual words to move away
Mm.
from, move towards, and I found it so super helpful. But I guess the domino effect of statements being at a high ratio is how the kid perceives it. So it's you're just deciding, you don't understand, you don't care, so I'm not going to
Right.
express myself
See.
authentically, and then we're just butting
Right.
heads. So it
Because
sounds
then
like
we
you
react poorly to that.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. Okay, so that's some of the mistakes we're making. So to go back to like, what does it look like to do it differently when a student comes to you? What type of stuff are you asking them, saying to them to try to figure out all the things we've talked about today? What are the factors at play? What can we shift?
Yeah. Um. Well. One thing I can offer is, I begin almost every meeting with a student with, is there anything on your mind that you're dying to go over?
Hmm.
Like, what are the challenges in front of you? Um, where would you like for this to go today? What would you like us to tackle? And very often the answer is, I don't know. It's like, okay, cool. I mean, I have some ideas. Um, and we can go with that. Um,
And
I
instantly, you've just set a vibe of we're equals, we're doing this together.
That's the hope.
Just such a different position than like, here's the agenda for today, and here's what I need to cover with you, which is not a wrong way to
Right.
approach
Right.
supporting a kiddo,
Right.
but
Absolutely.
we're not really talking about right or wrong. We're talking about the result, the effect, the vibe, and then the reciprocity.
Exactly.
So I
Yep.
love that. I love how you started off.
Yeah. And it takes a lot of work to get to the point where, they will actually volunteer something a lot of the
Mhm.
time. Um, Sometimes, I'm not working with them long enough for us to get to that point, but
Right.
I think it's important to, like you said, set that tone. Um, and another thing, it's a little thing, but I think it's pretty consequential. Um, if they interrupt me, 99 times out of 100, I let them.
Mm.
And it almost doesn't matter what I'm saying. If they want to talk, if they want to get something out, because like, and again, part of that is having that clarity of vision and having a certain measure of like confidence, I would say, um, in the sense of like, what is it? Confidence isn't knowing everything's going to be okay. It's knowing that you're going to be okay no matter how things turn out. Um, but uh, yeah, I mean, I think making sure that they can interrupt me uh, is, within reason, within
Sure.
limits, but very, very generous limits. I think that's particularly important. Um, you were talking about pausing,
Mm.
right? Like just, and I do that a lot as well. I mean, there's a blog post on my website that centers on that. When they, very often a student would be like, but man, like I can't figure this out. The thing to do is not to jump in at that point, as I think a lot of people would. The thing to do is watch their body language, because if they're saying, oh man, I just can't figure this out, but the pencil's still moving and they're still looking at the page,
They're working on it.
back off, stay away. If they say, oh, I can't do this, and then they disengage, that might be an opportunity to jump in. And again, when you do jump in,
But not with
It's
a solution or a statement. What do you
not with a
jump in
solution or a
with?
statement. At most, it should be okay. Look, we've been at this for however long. Not a bad time to take a break. If that's okay with you, let's get up, walk around, get some water, come back. What do you think? But um, very often, I'll like you said, respond with a question and say like, okay, well, was that like critically frustrating? Do you want to take another shot at it? What would you like to do?
Mhm. So more of a
Um,
brainstorm,
oh yeah,
full of
totally.
questions.
Yeah, and that's another thing. Yeah, I mean, um, I like to go through these exercises of okay. So another question I commonly get is, what am I supposed to do here?
Mm,
What does the test want me to do?
mm,
What's the way to go about this? As though there are only one, right?
right.
So, like a brainstorming exercise could be a ton of fun. And sometimes you have to like hold their hand through it, and then go back and then be like, okay, what are some different ways we could have done this? Because sometimes you see it, like particularly with math, like you might see it in retrospect.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Right.
and um, like I will, if we're trying to solve a novel problem, I'll try to say, well, okay, what do you think? I mean, it sounds like you can't see your way all the way to the end of this problem. Is there any part of this you can pick on and maybe
Mm,
like, figure that out? And then based on their answer, then when it's time for me to suggest something, I'll suggest something based on that. So again, sticking with like the algebra thing, um, uh, or the math thing, if we have an algebra problem and it's multiple choice, and I say, well, what do you think, do you think there's anything about this? And they say, well, I mean, I guess I could just plug these numbers in. I'm like, go for it. Just plug the answers in, see which one works, because the test doesn't care. It just knows which bubble you put in. And in that sense, it's sort of maybe paradoxically, but not really. Um, gives you a lot more freedom to problem solve than math class,
right.
which is another moment of like, what are we doing? Like,
Right.
how
Exactly.
does a
After that.
standardized test gives you more freedom than? But anyway, yeah. So just basically, and I guess this is, thinking about it now, this is an aspect of believing in them relentlessly. It's like, no, even
Mhm.
when you explicitly tell me that you want me to intervene,
Mm,
I'm still going to center the idea that you have an idea somewhere in there that we can play on.
yeah.
You know?
Yep. And our personal dynamic has gotten so intense at the beginning of this school year. I was so heavy handed last year for various reasons we won't go into that felt really legit and necessary. That
Sure.
when I tried to initially back off this year, he would just be like, well, can't do it. I don't know. And he was waiting. He was waiting for me to
See?
do the thing. And there was like this little, like, it was like a duel in a Western. Like we looked at each other
Right.
and I was like, well, I'm here.
I
And when
love
you
that visual.
have an idea or two, I would love to hear it. And he was like, like, what? You're not just going to figure this out for me.
Yep.
And it was so hard.
Yeah.
But it is better. It's better. It's just really hard to help me with the pausing and the shifting to a question. My pause sounds like, huh. Like that's like my reminder to myself, like, don't solve, don't suggest, don't just like, well, I just kind of stall. And that is like, okay, now ask a question. I wonder what would happen if, you did what, whatever. Um, so I don't know if that would help a parent who's listening. But I also want
Totally.
to talk about, and I think maybe we can wrap up after this. There's a lot of great information. We're obviously going to come back and do this again. We
Love it.
talked about shifting the ratio of statements to questions. Can we
Hmm.
just touch on making sure parents are clear on why they're asking questions? Because you can also ask the wrong
Yeah.
kind of question or ask a question with the wrong purpose. So when you're asking one of your students questions, what's underneath of that? What are you trying to get at?
Yeah. Oh, okay. I love that because I think it is so important, and it is I mean, it gets to something that I have struggled with for a long time. Um, and I want to, so, in the spirit of credit where credit's due, um, it's when I was speaking with somebody in the unschooling movement
Mm,
on the main line. I think it was at Open Connections,
Hmm.
and they were saying at the time, at least, again, that's not a place that I'm like super familiar with.
Right.
I want to be clear about that, but it was a really mind-opening experience to, to tour the place and talk with the people. One of the things that they said just really stuck with me is, um, they they have a rule never to ask a question that they already know the answer to,
Mm.
because that evinces a power dynamic,
Hmm.
which is it seems like kind of an extreme way to put it, but it's true. It's like, when you ask a rhetorical question, you're saying, I have an answer, but I'm not
It's
going to
just
give it to
another
you.
version of a
Like,
statement, right?
right, like I want you to perform for me,
Right.
you know, and like it seems so obvious that that's a bad thing to do, and it is so difficult to stop yourself from doing it.
Mhm.
Like, we tend to act, again, when I say we, I mean humans, right? Like,
Mhm.
we tend to act like that is a completely legit way to interact with another human being, and it's so weird. Like, it's fair enough when you're talking like in an opinion piece, or like when you want to do it for illustrative purposes, but like, um in a situation where you're trying to help somebody figure something out, asking them rhetorical questions or Socratic questions or something like that can very easily go amiss.
Mhm.
um or maybe awry is a better word, but
Mhm.
anyway, yeah, like you don't want to evince a power dynamic, and um a question should always, always, always be about finding information, right? So the very very
So if you think
simplest.
you already know the answer, you're not asking the right question.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's actually a great way to put it. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, yeah, it's
Yeah.
awesome. It's um, you know, this gets back to something I touched on earlier. It really, really pays to make every effort you possibly can to get underneath your own psychology.
Mm.
Um, I heard it said once. We have no idea how our minds work. We have no idea what motivates us. We think we do, but we don't. Which is why there are these giant, sprawling departments of psychology at all these universities. Otherwise, there'd be no mystery. you know.
Sure. There's so
So
much
we
to
we have to do a lot of work on ourselves to really understand what we're trying to do in a given situation. But it is extremely important to make sure that your questions are genuine.
unpack. Mhm.
And at the very least, if you're asking a Socratic question that the other person, I guess in this case, the child or the student, knows what you're doing and why, and feels like it's fair.
Mm.
Otherwise it's just
Mhm.
a power dynamic.
Right.
Um, so
And the question
yeah,
is not to, it's not with the goal of persuading them to the way you think.
it shouldn't be.
It should be right. It really, like, we're talking open ended. I don't have an
Mhm.
agenda. You're really trying to open up their head, get inside, and see what's going on in
Right.
there.
Absolutely.
With the secondary result of, like, they see that that's what you're trying to
Right.
do, and now the dynamic is better.
And related to that, like I think, one thing I'd want to, because this also connects to something that I mentioned before. Um, if you're having a hard time with that, that's a great opportunity to be like, um, okay, I want to help you through this, and I feel like I know exactly how to get to the answer, but uh, and I keep thinking of questions to ask to help you try to figure this out, but all those questions are like rhetorical, like because I already have this plan mapped out in my head, and I feel like if I do that, if that's what I offer, it's going to completely eclipse your own problem solving ability.
Hmm.
And just say that, or whatever's the truth in that particular moment. Just like, just be
Right.
transparent about it, and um and and honest, because what they're going to see in that moment, I mean, I'm sure in a lot of cases that they're going to, I mean, a lot of teens would just take the opportunity to steamroll you or whatever, but like what they're regardless of what they do, what they're going to see in that moment is, wow, this person is really confident. They're totally fine with being vulnerable. They're being honest with me. They're leveling with me. They're telling me what their motives are. And I can trust their motives because they just made an embarrassing admission about themselves.
Right.
So, okay, yeah, that's probably legit. And
Yeah.
those moments can be extremely powerful. One of the reasons I never, um, not never, but like I don't do the level of detailed prep for my tutoring
Mhm.
sessions that a lot of other tutors do,
Mhm.
is that if a student asks me a question I don't have the answer to, I want to be there on the
Mm.
journey with them.
And say you don't know and you have to find out.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. So I presume that all of this, I mean, I know you don't want to hold yourself up as an exemplar, but this is what you aim to do with your students.
Yes.
And I
Thank you. I appreciate
presume
the
that
framing.
you would say that this is why you're able to help them. Like all of this ties back to the missing skill, right? But it can't be about the skill. It has to be more about the dynamic, the confidence, the motivation, them finding
Yes.
their own motivation and purpose.
Right.
And that's where your success probably comes from.
I like to think so. I mean, if you have, the executive functioning, the ability to ask questions and figure things out for yourself or whatever, and a terrible SAT score and mediocre grades, you'll be fine. If you got the A's
In
and the
terms of
1600 on the
belonging.
SAT at the expense of all those other skills, as a lot of students do,
That's really important for parents
it's
to
gonna
know.
suck.
Yep. Yep.
So
Yep. And you said, so to wrap this up, a couple other things you
mhm,
said that I thought were really great. You said I can't expect kids to think in those terms, those problem solving, critical thinking, ask questions terms, if I'm not thinking in
right.
those terms. So now we're back to the modeling. You're
Yes.
not just finding out what's in their head,
Right.
putting yourselves on the same side of the problem, but you're also saying like, well, here's what it looks like. Here's how you do this.
Mhm,
So for kids that are lacking the skill to do that, now you're showing them how you do it. There's just so
right.
many benefits to doing it this way.
Right.
Um,
I think
and
so.
then you said you can't expect your kid to have the level of motivation that comes with purpose if you can't help them come up with or articulate a purpose.
Absolutely.
So before we can handle the task at hand, we kind of have to help them find their own reason to want to handle
Right.
the
Right.
task at hand, learn it, master it, nail it, whatever. Um,
And it
and
has
you
to be
said
theirs.
it has to be theirs. That was what, yeah, when I was getting the purpose has to be theirs. So finally, let's say we have a student who truly doesn't care about their grades. They're of the mindset of like, look, I'm going to be successful in life. I'm not worried about it. It's going to be fine. But the parent
Mhm.
highly focused on grades, achievement, career, whatever. What if the purpose has to be theirs? Where do we go with that? That's my last question for you.
Yeah. No, I mean that is um um that is a uh that is a really tough situation. And I think, if to the extent that I'm going to offer an answer, um I'd I'd want to be careful to say that, people have different reasons for caring about grades and career and everything, and wanting their kids to care more about those things than they do. Um, so, I have to answer with a certain measure of humility, for you know for those reasons. Um, so a few things. Um, I, with that kind of a mismatch, I mean, one potential reason is they want they have those goals for their kid for their own reasons,
Mm.
and not because they, are doing that work of, constantly getting to know the kid. Um, and, again, I think, as we both seem to agree, that's totally reasonable. Like, you as parents, we are much more likely to know what's going to work out well for a kid than the kid is. I mean, especially if they're in sort of like a rebellious phase, and it's clear to them that their values and ours don't line up. But as parents, and in my view, as educators as well, we have to promote, we have to approach this with some measure of humility. Like, I might think, I don't really, but I might think that it's critically important for somebody to get an A in geometry. If a student in my class tells me they don't care, maybe they're right. I mean, if they're telling me that they're never going to use whatever it is, the probability that I'm right, that it is valuable for them, isn't 100%. And there are all kinds of, I mean, one of the things that makes me want to pull my hair out about the college admissions process, for example, is that we have convinced everybody that college is the thing to do, and trade schools, for example, are alternative career paths. Less than, exactly. Or joining the military, or getting a job right out of high school, whatever it is. Like, these are things you do when you can't get into college. Excuse me. Right. Come on. Like, I don't know if I've met anybody. Like, I've met a lot of people in the trades recently, and I don't think I've met a single one who's unhappy with the way they've gone.
Really good way to make a living.
It's a really good way to make a living.
Maybe better for your mental health too.
No, I mean 100%.
Working with your hands, moving around, doing what you love.
Absolutely.
Yeah, our values are definitely shifted.
I know somebody. I know. So this is somebody who works on one of our cars. He God, I mean, he can talk up a storm. He has the attention span of a goldfish. Like, he has a hard time listening on a lot of topics. Like, if you interacted with him, you would sort of like amateur diagnose him with like ADHD. Like, that's how he seems. When he's working on a car, he moves slower and more methodically than, like, he's like a snail.
Yeah.
And yet he gets the job done faster than anybody I've ever seen, because like he just doesn't make mistakes. Like, that's where he should be. Yeah. And if he's sitting there getting mediocre grades and telling people he doesn't care in school, maybe he shouldn't.
Right. Yeah.
So
it may come down to us as parents shifting. It may not be a solution for the child in that moment.
Right.
The solution might be that we shift what's important, what we're focused on, and we find
totally
we can meet.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of my favorite distinctions, and again, this is something that's really hard for like the human brain to accept, is that there's a difference between this person is right and this person has a point. If a kid is saying that school is useless to them and they don't care, they might be wrong, but they probably have a point. And until we understand what that point is, we can't do anything about it.
And they believe that we understand what that
is. Yes, thank you. Absolutely. Yeah. Yes. That might be more important, frankly. But yeah, it starts with us.
Wow. Justin, I feel like I've been through a long therapy session.
Oh no.
This is incredible. I'm going to have to break this down to be probably more digestible for parents, because I know that they're stretched and I don't want them to miss a thing of this. But before I let you go, will you just touch on, again, the name of your business that you have with your wife is Rocket Prep? What is your main focus there? Who's your ideal client, and where can families find you?
Sure. So company's name is Rocket Prep. We're at rocket-prep.com. And on paper, we help students do better on standardized tests, get better grades in schools.
Which sounds like really the opposite of what we talked about today. Right. That's why you said on paper.
Yes, exactly. Because more than that, I guess this gets to the ideal client. More than that, what we're about is using academic challenges as punching bags for building transferable skills. So our ideal client is somebody who understands that like whatever an academic challenge is, like an SAT score is just a means to an end. And actually more than that, test prep is a means to an end. And that end doesn't just include the score.
And stay
Doing
tuned
better in
because
school.
we're going to do a video about
Yes.
test prep.
Yep. Yep. It can't just be about getting the high score. What really matters in the long run is what you did to get there, what you learned along the way, whether you could transfer it to other contexts. And to that, I bring my background in cognitive psychology and my sense that, you know, the process is not worthwhile unless it uncovers those opportunities for deeper growth and exploits those opportunities.
That is eloquent.
Oh,
All
thank you.
right, rocket-prep.com. Thank you so much for your time. We'll wrap up for
Pleasure.
today. I can't wait to share this with parents. Go find Justin if your kiddo needs him. And we'll be back soon. We will be talking about test prep very shortly. Thank you so much for
Sounds
your
good.
time.
Thanks, Erica.